Hello and welcome to Designer Market Update. Today is Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. We have begun now a new era in the United States of America under the leadership of President Donald J. Trump, who is now the 47th president of these United States of America. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing that is because of its potential implications for Bitcoin. There's no other reason. So Bitcoin is currently trading at about $107,000+ a coin. Hash prices themselves are up to $62, which is pretty damn nice. And the network hash rate has remained somewhat subdued at 781. Now, those numbers are great, but when we look at the overall Bitcoin mining ecosystem, or at least the publicly traded Bitcoin mining ecosystem, I see nothing but almost all losses, right? It's been a pretty tough day for these stocks. Now, with that said, I do want to emphasize that Bitfarms is actually kind of holding its own. It's not down dramatically. It's trading about $1.69 as I create this broadcast at about 3:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday. Interestingly, RIOT Platforms, which is down about 2% today, made a very interesting announcement with regard to their plans for about, I think, like 600 megawatts of capacity at their Corsicana facility. If I'm understanding it correctly, they basically want to explore HPC AI as the use case for those megawatts. In other words, we don't want to keep chasing Bitcoin with Bitcoin mining. We want to see what may come about as a result of HPC AI. The reason why I think that's interesting is because if we think back to Ben Gagnon comments at the Needham Growth Conference in New York City, and Ben, of course, is the CEO of Bitfarms, at least for the past 6 or so months, he placed an emphasis as well on HPC AI. And so I wonder to myself, if to the extent we see Bitfarms truly execute on its plans to, I don't want to say diversify away from Bitcoin. I don't know that that would be a fair way to characterize it, but rather to develop energy assets that have the capability of either being used for Bitcoin or for HPC AI, to the extent we see a little bit more of an emphasis on HPC AI, and that perhaps in 6 months, maybe a year from now, we see a Bitfarms that has a really strong, robust presence in the HPC AI universe, right? Not so much as a company that's attempting to compete with Google or Facebook or, by buying a bunch of, machines, but rather a company that's providing the energy infrastructure, right? Through which a partnership with many of those companies can potentially be reached to host their machines at Bitfarms facilities. See where I'm going with this? Could we see a situation where, granted the agreement that exists between RIOT and Bitfarms, right? For lack of a better word, their non-aggression pact, okay, to keep things as they are. I believe that pact ends on or about May of 2026. So roughly a year and a half from now, a little bit less than a year and a half from now. So is it possible that you might see a scenario where RIOT, who themselves are expressing an interest in HPC AI, might say, hey, you know what? We own 20% of Bitfarms. We really, really like what they're doing. And we should just kind of come to the table again. Let's get real with a number and let's make this work this time, right? Let's make the combination of these two entities something that Bitfarms shareholders will have no problem saying yes to because the price is right. Okay? I think that only really happens, though, if we start to see Bitfarms execute, roll out these energy assets, develop these energy assets, and really get them to a point where you actually have, win-win partnerships coming into the equation. Make sense? Now, listen, the fact that Bitcoin is pumping, as they would say, the fact that the network hash rate is remaining subdued, the fact that hash prices are up to 63-ish, right? They're kind of moving higher. That all, generally speaking, bodes well, not just for Bitfarms, but for the entire ecosystem. But I also understand that there is a profound amount of frustration with where the stock price is right now. I know you might be saying, hey, Stephen, that's great. A year from now, a year and a half from now. I mean, there are a lot of people I've heard directly from many of you, right, who've told me, hey, I've been in this thing for a year now and it's done nothing. Like I'm down, right? So I'll remind you of something Ben said at the Needham Growth Conference, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, right? This idea that, hey, you got to start thinking in terms of the companies that haven't maybe caught up, right, in terms of their market performance. One could make an argument, hey, that's maybe where one should focus, right? So like when the street starts looking with renewed attention at Bitcoin, right, at the players within the Bitcoin ecosystem, and we start looking, right, more broadly at, hey, which companies have flexibility to do more than just Bitcoin? Well, I think Bitfarms is going to be pretty darn high up on that list, right? So to the extent that Bitfarms itself can position itself as a company that's just basically, to keep it simple, a company that can do more than make Bitcoin, a company that can make money. Remember, I used to have this little kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of like jabbing joke a little bit with Stronghold, this idea that, hey, we could be great at energy arbitrage. We could be great at, doing all these amazing things, right? At a theoretical and practical level. But if it doesn't translate into actually making money, it becomes more and more challenging, right? To with a straight face, speak to investors and shareholders and say, hey, we're on the right path, right? Like if you're not generating at some point, a lot of, free positive cash flow, potentially even some earnings, if those things aren't in place, right? And we see that they're growing, it becomes difficult to maintain the enthusiasm. And I think in the case of Bitfarms, what I've been told over and over again is, hey, there's this issue of dilution, right? Broken promises, this issue that, hey, what are we doing? What's really going on here? So I will say this, okay? We're going to be getting a Bitfarms update more than likely in very early February, and that'll be the January 2025 update, right? How much Bitcoin was created? Hey, what's the financial situation looking like? What's the business, looking like, a business update? Let's see what that looks like, because I think if we begin to see evidence that we're slowly but surely moving in the right direction, I think the journey itself to get to the 21 exahash that we should have probably reached by the end of last year, I don't know that that's going to necessarily take an extraordinary amount of time. I think I think once things start to happen, they can happen fairly quickly. Now, that being said, there's another variable that we need to consider. As of February 1st, it's my understanding that the Trump administration here in the United States will be imposing tariffs on Canada, amongst a couple other countries, I believe. But specific to Canada, we're going to have to do a little bit of homework to just double check and see, well, hey, how might these potential tariffs, if they take effect, right? How might that impact Bitfarms and the work that it does in Canada in relation to its operations in the United States? And how does that potentially impact its finances? I don't know at this moment what the answer to that is, or even if there will be any tariffs that are ultimately imposed, right? I know Canada has been formulating, I think, a very robust message, right? An action plan to kind of push back a little bit, right? In a friendly yet assertive way to try to figure out, hey, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? Like to try to create a little bit of an opportunity for a negotiated settlement. And so, I'm optimistic that things will not politically and economically deteriorate between both the United States and Canada to a point where it really starts to harm people on both sides of the border. I think Canada is a phenomenal country. I've lived in Canada. I love Canada. I love the United States. I choose to believe that two great countries can coexist in a economically beneficial manner for both places. But we'll have to see, right? This is a whole new ballgame now. Okay, my friend, let's stay positive, let's be great, and we'll see each other again tomorrow.